All right. Hey guys, just thought I'd throw up another video and I want to talk about the internal rate of return. So a lot of people don't actually understand this concept and like they know the definition, but they don't actually understand it. So let's just jump right in and I'll show you a couple of calculations with NPV, IRR. I'll also go over equity multiple, cash on cash, just some basic important concepts for underwriting in commercial real estate. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see this. Here's what we're gonna do. So you find an apartment that you want to buy and you want to know if it's a good investment, right? So we're gonna have a couple of cash flows. So let's just start modeling this real quick. Go year zero. So I'm just shift over, Control R. Sometimes you have to do it twice for it to recognize your pattern. But yeah, let's take it to 5 years. So let's do a 5-year hold period. And then let's format this actually. So Control 1. Let's do custom number before the 0 parentheses year. Okay. So we've got all our years. Let's do Alt HB, throw on a bottom border. And then right here, we'll have an initial outlay. Here we'll have an after tax cash flow. Shift both of these, Alt HOI to resize. Alt HB, let's do a side border right here just to make it look pretty. Let's see, right border R. Okay, so we want to buy this complex. Let's say there's 50 units. Let's do -50. We want to show this as a cash outflow, so we're paying money. Let's say we can get each unit at $270,000, and then we'll have a LTV of 70% on this. So the lender is going to put up 70% of the debt. So let's assume that 30% of the cost is going to be equity. And then let's also format this as a currency. And I like to use this one because then anything that's negative shows up in red parentheses. That way I just don't get confused. And actually I'm going to do, let's do it for all of these. Currency, this one, I don't want any decimal places. Okay, perfect. And then as far as after tax cash flows go, maybe another day. Actually, I have another video where I walk through an income statement for real estate. I won't do that here, but let's just assume that we can get 1,100 in rent each month from each of these units. And let's, make that annual. So we got 12 months a year. And like we said, we're going to do 50 units, and then maybe expenses are like 35 to 40% of your revenues. Then you got to pay off your debt service. So I'm just going to assume that I'm going to make 25% of the total rents. Bottom line, that's what my after-tax cash flow will be. And then each year, let's go ahead and just like grow this by 10,000. Okay, whoops. Okay, and then let's also throw in a sales price. Let's say that at the end of our hold period, we can get 7 million out of this thing. Yeah, I mean, obviously it'd be a lot more if we included the debt on the project, but just for apples to apples, let's say that at the end of our whole period, we'll have 7 million in equity compared with the 4 million that we put in. Let's bold these. Okay, so, and then let's reference that real quick, plus this guy. So yeah, we'll have cash flows in each of these years. The year 5 distribution will be a lot larger because it includes our disposition. And then, yeah, let's do a discounted cash flow analysis of this. So I'll show you, I dropped in some equations here. So when we're doing a discounted cash flow analysis, we're using the present value formula. So you're essentially finding a future value. Well, you already have your future value. You're taking your cash flows in all your future years, and then you're going to discount them back at some discount rate. The reason being is because of something called the time value of money. So if you have $3,000 and you stuff it under your mattress and wait 3 years, in 3 years that it's not going to be $3,000 anymore. Because of inflation, it's going to be worth less. So that's what the time value of money kind of states. So whenever you're going to do an investment in real estate or something else, you typically want to discount your future cash flows back to find a net present value so you can figure out what your project is worth today. So let's write that equation out real quick. So we're going to reference this right here, this year 1 cash flow. Let's do my laptop, it's FN F4 to anchor a cell. Might be just F4 for you, depending on how you have that configured. So right now it's locked by column and by row. So you see the money sign E and then the money sign 6. Well, if you hit F4 again, now it's locked just by row, or excuse me, just by column. If you hit it again, now it's locked just by row. So we want it to be locked by just column only so that we can still copy it sideways. But if we were to copy it down, you know, it wouldn't change the location of the cell. Hopefully that makes sense. It doesn't apply here, but it is a useful tip. And then so that's our future cash flow, that 165,000. Then we'll divide by the parentheses 1 plus. So we're saying divide by 165,000 plus, and then we'll reference a discount rate that we'll put in here. Let's lock that in place as well because we don't want that to move. And then we'll raise that to the first power. Let's write in our discount rate real quick. Don't pay attention to this just yet, but just know that this is going to be my discount rate. And let's just call it, I don't know, 6% for now. Let's convert all these to currency. Decimal place, or no decimal places. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's do it again. So we should be able to copy this over, but it doesn't really like to recognize the pattern for the exponents. So I found that you kind of just have to put that in manually. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Actually, let's just call this 8%. Okay, if you want to get into a cell without using your mouse, just do F and F2, maybe F2 on your keyboard. So that's a lot quicker than grabbing the mouse each time. If anybody knows how to make it recognize an exponent pattern, let me know. I would love to know the answer to that. But yeah, so now we have all of our present values for each of these cash flows. So notice that like in year 3, the true value discounted back, you know, applying a discount rate to that cash flow, it's not the same anymore. So we think the true value of $185,000 in year 3 today is actually $143,000. So that has some pretty big implications. Now let's find the net present value. So net being the sum of all the present values of our cash flows. Present value. So we'll just find the sum. Control up and down just to jump like quickly. That way you don't have to like go one cell at a time. And then let's add back in our initial outlay. Alt HY to resize and bold these, keep it pretty. And then let's just reference this. And then let's do net present value. So that's just the sum of these two numbers. Cool. So you can see we have a net present value of 1,258,000 on this project. So awesome. It's a great project. We're going to make money. As you were taught in, Finance 201, any project that has an NPV greater than 0, you should accept. But that being said, if you have two projects, one you're going to make, or you have a net present value of 1.2 million, another you have a present value of $20, you're going to choose the former, right? And that's where IRR comes in. So IRR allows us to compare, kind of put investments of any form on the same level to compare a rate of return to see which project would be the best for us to take. So Excel can calculate this for us, but I just want to illustrate to you guys how Excel does that. So what the internal rate of return is it's a rate of return that if you used it as your discount rate for these in your present value calculation, it would turn your NPV into 0, meaning you would not create value nor destroy value. Nothing would happen. So essentially, this is how Excel does this. So notice we have a 9% discount rate right now. All Excel does is with this IRR formulas, it starts to make guesses. So it'll be like, okay, let's try 2%. Dang, that's a huge NPV, 3.1 million. Let's try 20%. Okay, we're getting closer. Now we're negative 694,000. Let's try 12. Okay, positive 580. So all it does is it starts making guesses in both directions until it gets to 0. So we're getting really close, maybe 5 or 15.15. Shoot, let me show my decimals here so you guys can see what's going on. Let's try 15.30. Okay, we're like honing in on this. Okay, we're super close. So this is probably as close as I'm gonna get to 2 decimal places, but like we're super close to an NPV of 0. So that's exactly what the IRR formula does in Excel. So equals IRR. Then we're gonna choose all these negative and positive distributions, and it's gonna tell us what that IRR is. Let's show 2 decimal places. So if I just put in 15.25 right here, it's close to 0. It's not quite 0 because this number is actually like the decimal places just keep going, right? So if we were to just set this discount rate that is being used by all these calculations to calculate this NPV, if we were just to set that equal to our IRR that we calculated for these guys, then watch what happens. Boom. See that? 0. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense to you. Now, like you actually understand the definition of IRR. It's the discount rate. See, they're the same. That sets the net present value of all your future cash flows equal to 0. So another thing you guys need to understand here is that doesn't mean that at a 15.25% IRR, no value is being created, because at one point I thought that, and I think a lot of students think that. That's wrong. So remember, we're not actually using this IRR as our discount rate. So let's talk about the WACC real quick. And for anybody watching this video who knows more about commercial real estate than I do, like I would love your comments on this, because this is something that is really hard to figure out, and that's deciding what to use as your discount rate. So there's a couple methodologies, and one that I learned is the weighted average cost of capital. So essentially, I talked about how on the deal, let's say the bank is going to fund 70% of it, so a 70% LTV. Let's say they're going to give us a 4% interest rate on that money. And then equity, you're going to go out and you're going to raise money from investors to make up the other 30%. Inside that 30%, you might have a 5%, 95% split between you as the GP and the 95 to the limited partners. So equity is obviously a lot more expensive, right? Because debt, if anything goes south on the project, they have the first recourse or first claim to get their money back. And these equity investors have just bigger risks. So obviously they're going to require a larger return. So let's say that their average return is 20%. That's essentially the interest rate to equity. And then to find a WACC, all you do is you just multiply the portion allocated to debt times the rate or the cost of capital for the debt. And then you do the same thing for your equity. And then your WACC is just the sum of the two. Oops. If you need to get out of cell without touching your mouse, just do the F2 trick. Sorry, that didn't work. Just redo this. There we go. So that's where I came up with the 8.8% that I put here originally. So that is going to be our discount rate that we use. Other methodologies I've seen for choosing a discount rate is companies will look at what the, like they'll start with the risk-free rate, which is usually like a treasury note, maybe like the 3-month. And let's say that's 2%. Then, you know, if you were a bank lender and you were figuring out what your interest rate would be, or a mortgage lender, you would start with that risk-free rate, and then maybe you would apply another rate for default risk or credit risk, depending on the credit profile of the tenant. And then you would start layering on other discounts on top of that risk-free rate for maybe political risk, or maybe the building's older, so you know that you're going to have to make renovations, or just anything like that. And I've seen people decide on discount rates with that methodology as well, but I won't talk about that much more because I don't pretend to be an expert on it. But back to talking about the IRR. So yeah, this is a great project because we're using a discount rate of 8.8% and our IRR is 15.25%. So had our discount rate been, let's say like we had a really high cost of capital, or we just think the risk profile on this project is out the roof and it's 16%, you know not to accept this project. That makes our NPV negative. And that just goes back to what we talked about. If this discount rate's equal to IRR, no value is going to be created. You shouldn't take that project. So if your discount rate is ever higher than your internal rate of return, it's a no-go. So maybe I can illustrate it like this. Let's say that instead of creating $7 million of equity, we barely make anything as far as appreciation goes on this, and our IRR is just 6.5%. Notice what happens to our net present value. Now it's negative. So just know that if your IRR is higher than your discount rate, then theoretically it's a good project. It might not be a good project if the IRR is only 1% higher, because there's not going to be a whole lot of value add. And then you would want to look for, you know, other investments where you can get that spread a lot larger. But just know that if IRR is ever less than your discount rate, like, don't do the project because you're going to lose money. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I guess I'll just throw this in. It's not super important, but MIRR apparently is a little bit more bulletproof because IRR has a weak spot. It assumes that each of these cash flows is reinvested at your discount rate. So it's assuming that each of these cash flows can be reinvested to make 8.8%. So naturally, this is going to be a little bit higher than your true IRR. MIRR is a better calculation because it reinvests these cash flows at a risk-free rate, which I mentioned earlier. So I think it's just a way to be a little bit more conservative with the reinvestment of these cash flows. Because yeah, like I said, maybe that treasury note is just 2%. So if we run, see if I can remember how to do this calculation, equals MIRR values. Let's grab all this. Oops. Finance rate. What is our finance rate? Let me look at my notes real quick. Oh, our finance rates are discount rate. That's what that means. So we can grab all these. Our finance rate. Oh, whoops. Let's just equals MIRR. Select our values. It's 8.8%. We'll anchor it. It's a good habit to get into. And then the reinvestment rate now is we're using the risk-free rate, which is just more guaranteed, more conservative, more reasonable. Let's bring this out to 2 decimal places. Okay. So you can see that like the true IRR is probably a little less than 15.25. It's not a big spread. It's only like 70 basis points, but still an important consideration to make. Okay, let's move on from NPV and IRR. I don't want this video to be too long, but let's just cover real quick what equity multiple is. Control X, Control V, instead of having to control copy and delete it, move it. It's a good little trick. Cash on cash. And then once again, let's hold these. Okay, so equity multiple, let's actually start with cash on cash. So a cash on cash return basically just measures the return that you made. It's an annual return that you made compared with what you put into the project. So just memorize that it's annual. If you ever hear cash on cash, you're just looking at a 1-year snapshot of the project. So we're just going to reference this first year cash flow. We're just going to divide by the negative. We want this to turn positive, so it gives us a true percentage, or not a, so it gives us a positive percentage. And we're going to reference the money that we put in. Let's convert this to a percent. So let's do that with this whole row. So I have to do it over and over again. Okay, so you can see in year 1, our cash on cash return was just over 4%. So the 165,000 that we made on the back of our $4 million investment was about 4%. Then we can do this for every year. Notice I didn't anchor this guy. So watch what happens if I just copy this over. So I get an error. It's because I have to anchor this initial outlay so that it doesn't move when I copy it. Okay, so there you go. Another issue with this, notice like this cash on cash looks huge. It's because it's including the disposition price, and you would never include that, you know, because once again, you're just trying to find a cash on cash annual return. Usually it's based on your cash flows, you know. This is just going to skew your average. So if I was you, I would just, before dividing by your equity portion, I would just subtract out your sales price. That didn't work. Let's try putting parentheses around this. There we go. And then you can calculate an average cash on cash for the life of your hold period, which is 4.57%. Cool. Equity multiple is really similar to cash on cash, except that it's a multiple, it's a number, it's not a percentage. And instead of just looking at 1 year, you're looking at your multiple of all your cash distributions. So you're looking at the whole life of the hold. So all you'll do is, I believe, the sum of all these cash flows divided by the equity that you put in. Once again, notice that I made it negative. Yep. Let's do number. Let's just take it to 2 decimal places. Actually, let's do custom. That way we can do a little X. And then take it to, oh shoot, it's not gonna let me do decimal places because I want those. Let's delete that. Let's try this. There we go. Okay, so a 1.9x equity multiple means that we almost doubled our equity on this project. So if you had an equity multiple of 1, you didn't create any value. You literally got out exactly what you put in. So hopefully that makes sense. Once again, equity multiple, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's your multiple on equity. Before ending this video, I'll show you guys one more thing. So just so you can like think about this critically, let's say you have 2 projects. Dive into like these distributions. It's going to require the same amount of equity for property 1 versus property 2. But maybe for this property 1, notice that like you're dumping a lot more money into it earlier on. So maybe like you're doing a lot of renovations, or excuse me, for property 2, you'd probably be doing renovations, because notice your cash flow for your first year is way lower than the cash flow for this property number 1. So maybe property 2 is your reno, or is you're doing your renovations, and here you're not doing any. And then because of that, in year 5, because property 1 didn't renovate, you're getting less out of it. You can't sell it for as much as property 2 could. So the reason I'm showing you this example is because every project we have to ask a question. Or I always ask myself, what's more important, the internal rate of return or the equity multiple? I always hear like, okay, what matters more? And the answer really is, it depends on your strategy. So let's run these calculations real fast. So IRR, equity multiple, okay, so internal rate of return for the project with no renovation is high. It's higher than the second, 14.90%. So immediately, like, a lot of people would see that and they would just be like, okay, property 1, do it. Don't renovate it. We'll just sell it for less, yada, yada. The return is better anyway. But watch what happens when we calculate an equity multiple. So we'll take the sum of all of our distributions, divide it by the equity that we put into the project. Okay, so notice the difference here. So now, which one of these has the higher equity multiple? It's property number 2, right? So you have to decide what your strategy is, because like I said, the owner of property number 1 may defer making needed capital repairs to boost the IRR, and in return accept a lower sales price. So the dollar amount that this property is actually going to return to investors is less than the true dollar amount that the property number 2 is going to return to investors. So although like on paper, the internal rate of return is lower, like there's more value returned to the investors here than in property 1. So it really just depends on what your strategy is. If you're investing with like a long-term buy and hold strategy, then property 2 would probably be better because you're going to make more money, you know, in the long run. That being said, if the cash flows for property 2 are like uncertain in any way, then you're probably going to want to take the one with the higher rate of return. So just know that it depends on the strategy. But hopefully this helps. Just to kind of recap, we've gone over how IRR is connected with the NPV and the discount rate, you know, potentially how people decide on discount rates, at least the WACC methodology. We've talked about equity multiple, cash on cash return. We've talked about what matters more, IRR, equity multiple, when to use or when they matter. And yeah, hopefully this video taught you guys a lot. And comment if you guys have any questions or reach out. Thanks.